Oops, sorry, unmute yourself again, Emma.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, March 29th, 2021. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Jack Schneider and Jennifer Berkshire on the hopeful death of bipartisan education corporate reform. Meanwhile, the trial of Derek Chauvin, the police officer who killed George Floyd, begins today, and a judge just allowed Chauvin's defense team to use a 2019 traffic stop, for which Floyd was never formally charged, in order to build their case. More on that later in the show. 10 states are dropping vaccine eligibility to 16 years old this week, as data shows that over a quarter of the U.S. population has received at least one dose. Contrast that with how less than 1% of the population of Africa has been vaccinated. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is looking to see if the president parliamentarian will allow for a third bill to be passed through reconciliation this year. All of this could be solved with filibuster reform, but seems like we've hit a snag there. Union voting officially ends today for 5,800 Bessemer Amazon warehouse workers, which activists are heralding as the most important labor fight in decades. The vote totals could take a little while, though. Reports of the LAPD detaining reporters and using violent tactics on protesters in Echo Park have emerged as demonstrations against the forcible removal of LA's houseless population from the park continued over the weekend. Secretary of State Tony Blinken expresses concern about the arrests of politicians who ousted Evo Morales in a coup, calls the arrests anti-democratic. Same old, same old. A 220,000-ton cargo ship blocking the Suez Canal, by which 12% of global trade passage has been wedged free. Capitalism can breathe easy. And Myanmar military forces have killed at least 90 people in the deadliest day since the coup last month over the weekend, or the killings were over the weekend, as the continued nationwide anti-coup protests are publicly called terrorism by authorities. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, everybody. As you can tell, I am not Sam Seder, but I am in for Sam, who is out this week on vacation. But Matt and I are going to hold down the fort for everybody. So very excited for a week of great guests. We have a pre-recorded interview with Jennifer Berkshire and Jack Schneider done by Sam earlier this week. And then I will be having my own guests on throughout the week. But let's begin talking about the trial of Derek Chauvin. So Derek Chauvin, the police officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes, killing him, begins today. He has pled not guilty to charges of second-degree murder, or second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. And the defense's case for Derek Chauvin is going to rest on basically assassinating the character of the man that he murdered, the victim, George Floyd. Here is attorney Ben Crump laying out how expressly wrong this narrative is, even though it's going to be run with by the defense in order to make their immoral case, and the media will likely pick up on it too, at least right-wing media. Let's take a listen.
They're going to take the playbook out, Reverend Allen. They're going to try to assassinate the character of George Floyd. For long as they're going to call your brother everything but a child of God. And they're going to talk about as much as they can about his record. But his record isn't an issue. All right. Because this is the trial of Derek Chauvin. Come on. Breaking news. This is the trial of Derek Chauvin. Let's talk about his record. All right. His 19 complaints of excessive force by citizens here in Minneapolis. That's what we should be talking about. George Floyd didn't kill anybody. Derek Chauvin was the person that killed George Floyd.
Yeah, and too often people forget that. They get caught up in other elements of George Floyd's past. So let's talk about, just because the defense is going to try to use this, what they're going to bring up in trial, what the judge allowed for them to bring up in trial. There was a 2019 incident where George Floyd was pulled over by police, and the video shows that he didn't immediately comply with the officer's request, and then he swallowed some pills and told officers that he was addicted to painkillers, swallowed 8 Percocets, he said, and the police called an ambulance, and George Floyd was taken by the ambulance there. And so there weren't any real charges filed there. What does the fact that he had an admitted drug problem have to do with his death? Well, they're trying to say that it was really all his death was caused by his usage of drugs, and not the obvious, what we saw in front of our own faces with our very eyes, kneeling on his neck, burying his knee, Derek Chauvin, into George Floyd's neck. The defense is going to try to that because of George Floyd's past issues with substance abuse, that was the real cause, or you can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that choking the air out of someone's throat didn't lead to his death for 9 minutes. For 9 minutes. And that's what's going to be talked about here. And so Derek Chauvin also, as Ben Crump pointed out, has a history of excessive force complaints, and complaints that weren't taken seriously by the police at the time. Over, I think the number was 19 that he mentioned there. Yet, we're going to pick out one moment that didn't even result in an arrest of George Floyd, talking about potential and past issues with substance abuse in order to muddy the waters and assassinate his character in the eyes of the jurors. And this is a tactic that I'm focusing on because it's worked so effectively in the past against Black victims. We've seen this time and time again. And the fact that the judge allowed this, I think, is questionable in and of itself. It is not relevant to the case. It is not relevant to the case. Say the defense wants to make the case that he had too many drugs in his system at the time, and that's why he died, which I think people who are looking at this honestly, the choking might have had more to do with it, but I digress. Okay, fine. Focus on the toxicology report. All this old video footage does is attempt to make George Floyd seem like a delinquent or like a person that shouldn't be trusted, basically. And
I mean, yeah.
And not the murderer in this instance. Go ahead.
What should be emphasized is 18 complaints in 19 years for Chauvin and involved in 3 shootings, right? Like that. Those are the details people should be emphasizing.
Exactly. That's really what we should be focusing on. But again, this is a well-worn tactic by defense attorneys and by people who are trying to let cops get away with, and not just cops, but white people murdering Black victims. That's how they're able to get away with this, is by smearing the judge. I'm not shocked, but it's obvious in my view that this shouldn't have been allowed. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Sam's pre-recorded interview with Jennifer Berkshire and Jack Schneider will be in your...
First, we'll have a little bit of ads, and then we'll come back to you quickly, and then we'll go back to the interview. But here's Sam with the ads. I know people don't want to miss Sam's ads, so here are those.
Thank you, Emma. You know, you shouldn't have to choose between a great shave and a fair price, and with Harry's, you don't have to. For a limited time, Harry's is offering their starter set plus a free travel size body wash at harrys.com/majority. Look, I've been talking about Harry's for, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years at least. Harry's delivers a close, comfortable shave. They do so at a fair price, still as low as $2 per refill. How do they do it? Well, Harry's bought a German razor blade factory that has been making blades for over 100 years. They have cut out the middlemen. The Harry's design team combined a weighted ergonomic handle with a textured grip and a flex hinge. It is actually one of my favorite parts about the Harry's razor. It's a smart, simple razor. It's designed for delivering a close shave along all contours of your face. There's no gadgets, not all buffed up. Doesn't look like, Rambo strapping it onto his leg. Very sort of classic look, simple shaver. Doesn't come in one of those big sort of ice fortress little containers that you got to, get a jackhammer to open the thing up. And for me, of course, my favorite part is the narrower razor blades and the weighted handle. Those are my 2 favorite parts, but people talk about the blades themselves and the lubricating strip. You're going to love it. They stand behind the quality of their blades so much they have a 100% money-back guarantee on harrys.com. For a limited time, Harry's has made their exclusive offer even better for listeners of this show. Check it out. New customers can get a special offer and a Harry's starter set and body wash, which apparently Emma's better half likes, at harrys.com/majority. You get a 5-blade razor, weighted Truman handle, foaming shave gel, a travel blade cover, and a travel size body wash. There's never been a better time to try Harry's. If you haven't tried it, go to harrys.com/majority to redeem your offer today. Also, today's show sponsored by Third Love. Third Love uses the measurements of millions of women to design bras with signature memory foam cups, no slip straps, and a scratch-free band in variety of sizes. You've heard us talk about their Fit Finder quiz, and now Third Love is just launching the Fitting Room. It's a new and improved version of the quiz. And I can tell you, folks, from our 2 different Third Love triers, right from their testimonial, they both said they've never had an experience where they've had a bra fit better than the Third Love one. The quiz focuses on size, breast shape, current fit issues, and your personal style to deliver bras and underwear that are perfect for you. From classic lace that actually feels soft to their #1 rated 24/7 classic T-sharp bra. You can check out all the exclusive styles at thirdlove.com. And now they have something new, introducing Lounge by Third Love. It's a mix and match styles, which are your unofficial uniform for anything you feel like doing. From the couch to weekend outings, it's loungewear that's made to wear everywhere. Plus, Third Love gives back. They donate all their gently used return bras to women in need. They support charities in their local San Francisco Bay Area and across the U.S. Now, to be honest, I don't wear bras. However, from one of our 2 official bra trier honors, the idea that I had 60 days to try out the bras drew me in, but in the end, I don't think I've ever had a better experience buying clothing online, certainly not when it comes to bras. The Fit Finder worked like a charm. The choice of styles, amazing. Both the bras I ordered were a perfect fit, and they were incredibly comfortable and cute and subtle. Third Love knows your one true fit is out there. So right now, they're offering my listeners 20% off your first order. Go to thirdlove.com/majority right now. You find your perfect fitting bra. You get 20% off your first purchase. That's thirdlove.com/majority for 20% off today. Lastly, everybody wants to be in top condition. For me, I want to basically stay as hydrated as possible at all times, but I also want a little energy. Well, when we push our body hard or we're just feeling down, it's important to take care of ourselves. And you got to do so with the proper vitamins and the proper nutrients. And like I say, the proper hydration. That's why Liquid IV created Hydration Multiplier Plus Immune Support. It maintains and strengthens your immune system. Hydration Multiplier Plus Immune Support is a cutting-edge blend of vitamin C, zinc, and Wellmune in convenient single-serving packets to help strengthen your immune system. The blend is powered by cellular transport technology, which is designed to enhance rapid absorption of water and other nutrients. Each packet is bursting with fresh, natural tangerine flavor. It tastes delicious, and it just makes you feel better. Liquid IV can provide 2 to 3 times more hydration than water alone. With every purchase, Liquid IV donates a serving of Liquid IV to someone in need. The company has donated over 10 million servings globally. Emma, huge fan of I'm actually looking at a box right now of Liquid IV on your counter of your host desk. That's I'm not even saying the drink. She has the whole box there. Meanwhile, any day that you're watching this show, you know, right off camera here, I have my bottle of the Liquid IV. I tend to go with the energy, but the immune support, it's good when I'm starting to feel like maybe I got a cold coming on. Maybe I've had a little too much to drink the night before. You can get your Liquid IV's Hydration Multiplier Plus Immune Support in bulk at Costco, or order online and get 25% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code MajorityRep at checkout. That's 25% off anything when you order and use the code MajorityRep. 25% off anything you order when you get better hydration today using that promo code MajorityRep, not Majority Report, MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. Now, back to Emma.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I'm actually drinking Liquid IV right now. But on to Sam's interviews, and then we will be back. Fun half with myself and Matt. Many, many fun times to come after this great interview that Sam did.
We're back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report, on the Zoom, as it were. A pleasure to welcome back to the program historian Jack Schneider, and welcome to the program for the first time journalist Jennifer Berkshire. They have written a book, A Wolf at the Schoolhouse Door, and have a podcast, Have You Heard? Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
So let's start, Jack, with some history, I guess. I mean, your book outlines and tries to make sense of what appears to be a disparate set of policies, approaches to education reform. And we're talking about what some people refer to as the corporate reform movement that has been, in many respects, the law of the land, literally and figuratively, for the past almost 2 decades now, a decade and a half, maybe. But let's go back to where these ideas actually originated, because it was closer to 40 years ago that these ideas sort of started to pop up. What was the context, and what were the ideas?
Yeah, so if you want to find the origins of some of this stuff, the best place to go is actually even further than the Reagan administration, which you were just alluding to from, and you've got to go back to Barry Goldwater's campaign for president, which energized a sort of a new grassroots radical right that, it radicalized Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, who had been a Democrat, an FDR Democrat, and who ends up becoming the Goldwater conservative that Goldwater himself could not be, right? Goldwater was crushed by Lyndon Johnson, but the ideas that he normalized in his campaign for president were ideas that by the time Reagan ran for president had really entered the mainstream on the right wing. And Reagan did even more to normalize some of those ideas. But interestingly enough, Reagan's ideas about education were quite unpopular. The American people were not ready to hear that Reagan had a vision of funding kids rather than schools that might devastate the public education system that so many Americans rely on and value. Americans were not interested in that. They were not interested in the idea of moving religion into public schools or moving kids out of public schools into religious schools. Certainly some people were, but Americans broadly did not buy into these policies. Flash forward to the present, and we have seen tremendous progress by the radical right to lay the groundwork for policies that Americans still generally don't favor when they know what's actually being threatened here, right? The language is far more anodyne than the policies themselves, right? They don't say, we are setting out to destroy the public education system. They don't say, our goal here is to eliminate teaching as a profession and transform education into a product that is purveyed by gig workers, right? That would terrify people. Instead, they talk about giving people choice and empowering individuals and allowing people to choose and giving them access to private schools and giving them the opportunity to pursue various options. And all of that sounds more or less passable, but what they actually plan for is the elimination of a $500 billion expenditure that we make every year when you combine federal, state, and local expenditures on education.
Jennifer, when Jack says fund students as opposed to education, and I'm not exactly sure that's the exact way that you put it, Jack, but it was some, explain what he means by that.
So the buzz phrase that you hear a lot of right now is fund students, not systems. And we can point to an example that's happening right now. So just this week, West Virginia passed the most sweeping voucher proposal in the country. And basically with no restrictions, it will hand the $4,600 per pupil that West Virginia spends to educate its students in the public schools. That money will go directly to parents who can then choose to use it on whatever they want, right? And so you can see how you're taking the money out of the system, which means the buildings, the teachers, the school boards, the unions, and you're putting it on an edu debit card, and you're letting individual parents decide this, I want this thing, not this thing. I'm gonna pay for homeschooling, or I'm gonna save my, I'm gonna use this voucher as a down payment on expensive private school. If you know anything about West Virginia, you know that those schools play an absolutely essential role in things like feeding kids and things like supporting kids who have lost parents to the opioid epidemic. And so the idea that the, really like the radical libertarian right can just sort of roll through West Virginia and get their legislature, which now Republicans have a supermajority, to get them to say, you know what, we're not going to do public education anymore. Instead, we're going to go with this radical market vision. And to me, what's so ironic about it is that just a few weeks ago, the governor of West Virginia admitted that a whole bunch of other right-wing proposals that they've enacted to try to make the state more attractive to business, things like right-to-work legislation and getting rid of the prevailing wage, none of that has worked. Each thing has made West Virginia a more miserable place for the people who live and work there. And this, I think, will top them all.
That's interesting, and I want to circle back to vouchers, and really this concept of their definition of public education is public funding of private, parochial, homeschooling, private education on some level, and so I want to circle back to that, but. Jack, tell us what and I guess just going back to the idea of it being Goldwater, how much of these ideas were born out of the civil rights era, or a response to the civil rights era? I mean, I think, the motivation for these things can change over time, but at that time, it's really hard to escape the idea that this isn't a blowback from the idea of segregating or integrating schools, rather.
Yeah, you're right, right? It doesn't come out of nowhere, nor is it just pure ideology, though we do want to, take seriously the ideology that frames any government as a problem, that frames any taxation as a misstep, because that certainly is a part of this, right? The idea that we tax Americans, right? What is essentially a government service at a massive scale. So pure ideology does play a role here, but then you're right that the context of what was happening in the 1960s absolutely framed the kind of radical right-wing pushback that you see in terms of a Goldwater approach to education, which later becomes adopted as a kind of de facto far-right approach to public education, right? Why should I pay more in taxes, goes the argument, so that those tax dollars can go to pay for somebody else's education, right? Why should my kid have to be moved around to some other school that I didn't choose? Why should my kid have to learn things in school? And, here we can see the present context of the kinds of culture war that Donald Trump was trying to stoke, rearing its head again, right? Why should my kid have to learn the sorts of things in school that run contra our family beliefs about, race or class or America? And so this idea that, there is a backlash to any sort of, widespread policy victory is a very real one. And the victories of the civil rights era produced blowback in terms of a response to racially integrated schools, fully funded public schools that rely more heavily on the equal distribution of tax resources, certainly the professionalization of teaching, because if you're going to fully fund schools and if you're going to serve kids well, then you are going to need a trained and professional workforce. That anti-unionism had already been a part of the radical rights response. But then when you see how over the years labor has been really decimated and yet teacher unions have remained pretty strong, you can see how that context then shifts. And, racially integrated schools today are less of an impetus for the ire of conservatives, but the fact that public education is a bastion for organized labor certainly draws the anger of conservatives who want to know why their tax dollars are going towards an enterprise that not only smacks of collectivism and government monopoly, but also this kind of, Soviet approach where organized labor is able to trump the directives of the corporate managers. The whole system just reeks to them of everything that's wrong with America. And they've been after public education for decades. It's only now, after 4 decades of really carefully laying the groundwork at the state level, that they're beginning to notch these victories.
Jennifer, I want you to speak to, I guess one of the premises of the book is that there's this sort of disparate, what would a seemingly disparate set of policies that are on one level contradictory, but when you dig down and make clear what you have in the book, the 4 principles that sort of give rise to these policies, it becomes more clear. But give us a sense of that. And I should also just say, just because Jack, you inspired me to just remind people, the public education system in this country was essentially born out of Reconstruction, and an era when we were basically trying to expand who was included as a citizen of the United States, and an understanding of that is the heart of the public education system, is this idea of inclusiveness and expanding a fundamentally democratic, small d, democratic initiative. But Jennifer, pardon my tangent, my little divergence there, but tell us what Jack has been describing a little bit, but this sort of ball of disparate policies that at face value don't necessarily seem consistent, but ultimately are.
Well, first, thank you for your tangent. I think one of our frustrations is that it's so hard to get people to see right now what an overlap there is between the voter suppression legislation that's being rolled out and, across the country and these sweeping school privatization measures. And our friend Derek Black has a fantastic new book out called Schoolhouse Burning that really traces that history back to Reconstruction and shows just how essential public education has been to democracy. So I think part of our hope isn't just to shine a light on the movement to dismantle the schools, but to remind people about just how essential public education is to democracy. Now, if you're in a state where you have a kind of an emboldened, Republicans in particular, if you have an emboldened legislative majority that is pushing really every school choice policy they can think of right now, it's got to be really confusing, right? They're railing against schools being closed, but also expanding virtual schools. They're talking about needing to help kids escape failing schools, but they're rolling out these education savings account programs that have no accountability at all. They're expanding charters. They are making it easier for teachers without credentials to teach. The list is long and it can seem really contradictory, but one of the main overlaps that we found consistently was the desire to cut costs. That, for example, virtual schools cost a lot less to operate. It's much harder for teachers to organize. You free school from the constraints and expense of a brick and mortar institution. You get rid of that pesky school board. So that cost-cutting imperative goes way back and it's always right there. And then another thing that we see all along is that so many of these policies first ask people to consume education the way they would any other consumer good, that you purchase your education option the way you would a car or a computer or a pair of shoes. And then ultimately the goal is to shift the expense of that onto you as well. We're convinced that these voucher measures we're seeing right now are a stopgap thing, that when a state like West Virginia talks about paying parents $4,600, the idea is that eventually K-12 would look like higher ed, where you decide how much you want to spend, and a robust loan system springs up to help you pay for that.
Interesting.
And Sam, if I can just jump
Please.
in and add a couple more pieces here, because I think Jennifer is so good at explaining what's going on right now and how these disparate policies function together to erode the system. I just want to underscore a couple other pieces of the ideology that undergirds these policy efforts. And so she mentioned cost cutting, and I alluded earlier to the war on labor. And there are two more pieces that we should just emphasize here. One is a faith in markets. Markets work and democratic politics don't. That is a fundamental belief here. And so the effort to shift public education into the private sector is not just about exposing it to the potential for profit. It's not just about seeking to try to cut costs by telling people that, it's a private good and they're responsible for purchasing it themselves. And if they can't, they'll maybe receive a subsidy. It's also this fundamental belief that schools will improve if they are subject to markets. And we actually have lots of evidence that that isn't the case, right? Schools are not like blue jeans. They're not like soda. They're not like cereal. They're not a commodity that actually improves when we expose it to the market and when we subject it to things like advertising. In fact, we know that that'll just make parents even more vulnerable because they won't be able to tell the quality of a school, right? Unlike a cereal, which you know the quality of the moment you taste it, right? A school actually takes a long time to figure out the quality of. It can sometimes take you 10 years after you've graduated to figure out what that school did for you. Right? There's one way in which exposing schools to the market could just lead to failure. People could just fall for slick marketing rather than knowing that the schools are all well-funded, which is something we've been long working towards, and that they're all of relatively high quality. Again, something we haven't fully realized, but something we should be working towards. And then the final piece here is just this emphasis on the private rather than the public, that my aims as an individual should be what I am able to pursue in all walks of life. And of course, as you alluded to earlier, Sam, that's not what public education has ever been entirely about. Sure, people can pursue their own interests and talents and abilities inside the schools, but this is something that we do together in this country. There's a reason we pay for it as taxpayers rather than as individuals, right? It's because we have to live together in this society. And in fact, we're all empowered as citizens, and we want to be able to not just live together, but make decisions together and see each other's interests and not just our own. And this ideology actually approaches it the exact opposite way. There's no such thing as society. There's only each of our individual aims, and we should be able to compete against each other to pursue our aims and, hopefully stay out of each other's way. Well, that's not the society I believe in. I think that's not the society most people want. They don't want to stay out of each other's way. They want to learn how to do things together.
Are you channeling Margaret Thatcher? Was it Margaret Thatcher that
Yes.
said that back in the day?
Yeah, yeah. And then Betsy DeVos channeled her.
Not a coincidence at all. That was her perspective. Okay, so Jennifer, and I want to swing back around on those principles that you guys have outlaid and how they sort of like manifest themselves in society today. But I think at this point, as people are listening, they're thinking Betsy DeVos, they're thinking Margaret Thatcher, Reagan, George W. Bush. Many of them are probably not thinking, and maybe some of them are thinking Bill Gates, and we'll go through those folks. But I would imagine that there's also a lot of people who are not thinking Barack Obama, and but Barack Obama's, but Arnie Duncan, Barack Obama's Secretary of Education, was, I mean, more or less all in on this, broad philosophy, if not the specifics, and maybe in many instances, the specifics. I think actually the way that I became aware of your book was through a review that Diane Ravitch wrote. And she started off that review by talking about how Arnie Duncan, Barack Obama's Secretary of Education, and Margaret Spellings, who was George W. Bush's Secretary of Education, wrote an opinion piece in the Washington Post lamenting that there was a decline for the bipartisan consensus of what needed to happen with public education. Now, from the three of our perspectives, that's a good thing. But it might come surprising to people that there was this, or is this bipartisan consensus. Jennifer, just outline that for us, because just explain to us, that lineage, if you will.
So that's such a good point that you just made, because the argument that we're making is that basically, you can go back to Reagan and before to find what the right wants. But what really changes is the way that Democrats start to talk about schools. And you see this big shift in the late 80s, early 90s, when they really embraced this instrumentalist vision of schools as workforce preparation, and that learning is going to determine your earnings. And so you can go back now and you think like, stop, Democrats, stop. Don't you see where this is going to lead? Right? Because it ends up, we end up in this corrosive situation where people who don't succeed feel looked down upon and like it's their fault. And then, we have, millions upon millions of people who have to take out money, take out loans to go to college, and many of them don't finish. And so they also feel this sort of sense of failure. So by the time you get to an Arnie Duncan, they have this incredibly elaborate theory of change about how they're going to raise the U.S. up in the ranks of international competition, how schools are going to better prepare students to compete in the workforce, not just nationally, but globally, and that we're going to measure that all along the way. We're going to see, students are going to need to do better on the tests. And so that means that they're going to need better teachers. And we're going to determine that definition of better by how good those teachers are at raising their test scores. We're going to have new standards. And then we're going to have teachers teach those standards. And, before you know it, you've got this kind of airtight airtight vision. And oh, there's one, little thing. We're going to need to weaken your unions for the right reason. And so you go back and you look at this and you think, wow, like Arnie Duncan really laid the groundwork for so much of this stuff. I blame him for defining schools in a way that most people find deeply alienating, that he opened the door to somebody like a Betsy DeVos who understood intuitively that parents don't care that much about test scores. And the more you talk about standardized and math and English test scores, the more you're turning them off. And I don't know if you remember, Sam, when he gave this speech and directed his ire at white suburban parents who had an inflated understanding of how smart their kids were. So I feel like a lot of the blame with this vision, really, we can lay at Arnie Duncan's feet. And the problem we have right now is that as good as the Biden administration is turning out to be on so many issues, think about their just aggressive approach to poverty. Think about how pro-union they are. But then it comes to education, very difficult to determine what their vision is. And the first policy they embrace out the door is to insist that students have to be tested this spring. Not a good sign.
Yeah, and by tested, you mean like all the states, I mean, everyone basically said, we need to waive the testing requirement. And they said no. And which now, I don't know what it is in other states. I know in New York, it doesn't have the same implications, but it's also just sort of a ridiculous. I mean, it's just one more burden that you're putting on the schools. We're going to figure out a way of getting them in and this and that. And it's completely, I mean, the data set is useless. The whole exercise in and of itself is a sheer waste. But let's go back on some level, because I mean, what Jennifer is describing, Jack, I think many people would say like this was, and you want to go back and tell the Democrats, hey, you're making a mistake. Some of them may not have felt it that way, even in retrospect. This was the term gets overused in my opinion, but this is literally what neoliberalism is, right? Yeah. Where we are talking about the commodifying education and that the market is the most efficient way to get our goals in this. And this is, I mean, literally a textbook definition of this neoliberal turn, where we're going to turn that never mind the aggregation of funds, but also the democratic oversight of those funds, and the implication that it is for as many people as possible. I mean, those three elements are fundamentally contrary to the idea of commodifying education, right? I mean, you want some scarcity, you want some price hierarchy, you want, et cetera, et cetera. And so Jack, we have this dynamic where there's this handoff between No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top, and there's also this other element of like on a parallel track, or maybe not sort of coincidental, is the Gates Foundation. And right now, over the past, I guess it's about a year, 9 billionaires have made $360 billion over the course of this past year, which is basically rivals, the amount of money that we gave to people in $1,400 checks in the last relief bill. One of them was Bill Gates. He has sort of moved on from education a little bit into the realm of like making sure that IP is protected with vaccines, because that's the most important thing to him. But it's indicative of how, like, when you're a billionaire and you have the ability to spend $1 billion or $2 billion, like in the way that I would go and say, like, hey, I think I'm going to have a turkey sandwich today. Those whims were all a little bit narcissistic. If I have that kind of money, though, all of a sudden my narcissism about and my ability to know everything turns into like a massive force. Will you just talk about how Bill Gates, his project, sort of like influenced the trajectory of education in this country?
Sure. I can't resist talking just for a moment longer about neoliberalism, though. You could see Jennifer and I were like bobblehead dolls listening to you there. And I think that it's really important for listeners to understand just how powerful that neoliberal consensus was and that it ran across administrations. It begins with George H.W. Bush, who brought the nation's governors together in Charlottesville in 1989 and who led this effort to create standards in Charlottesville in 1989. Which governor? Well, it was young Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, who then defeated George H.W. Bush and advanced the national legislation. So we're talking about two pieces of legislation here, Goals 2000 and America 2000, that were essentially Bush-Clinton hybrid pieces of legislation that then finally get moved forward by George W. Bush as NCLB. The Obama administration reauthorized that as the Every Student Succeeds Act. And so we can see here that standards-based accountability, which is essentially corporate style performance management, right? This is no different than you would see at, an aluminum manufacturing company. This idea that what a business does is it identifies metrics for measuring the performance of labor, and then it exercises top-down control in order to produce the kinds of results it wants, right? So this kind of corporate ethos is at the core of neoliberalism, as is the idea that exposing things to the market will improve them. And so the consensus here was charter schools, right? Republicans might have gone, sure, Democrats would not have, and the compromise was public schools that operated in the free market, right, that people could choose. And charter schools were one of the key strategies across these administrations for 20 years. Well, you can see how this laid the groundwork for those who wish to dismantle public education, because you normalize this idea that schools should be something that you shop for. You normalize this idea that, elites are the ones who should be making decisions and managing schools. And in many ways, there's a backlash to that, not to the choice piece, but to the piece which is you no longer are in control of your local public schools. And that's where somebody like Bill Gates comes in. I think Americans are tired of hearing billionaires weigh in on what their public schools ought to look like. And I think that that has driven forward this idea that Americans ought to be able to choose for themselves. Well, what they ought to be able to do is exert their voice through the public system because the public schools belong to them. But so many of them have felt disempowered in public education. The schools aren't doing what they would like them to do. They don't want the schools narrowly focused on standardized tests. They do like this idea of choice, which has been sold as a panacea to them. And so we are increasingly vulnerable to the allure of a system that is run on the basis of choice. Take a voucher and go to whatever school you want, and you can pursue your own aims there. And we've been encouraged to think of our own aims as something that we pursue in isolation from each other. And so I think this idea of, the billionaire education reformer is most important when we think about this individual as somebody who has shaken Americans' faith in the public education system, that the system belongs to us and that it's a system that works. Because in many ways they feel, no, it's a system that belongs to elites and it must be broken because every reform in the book is constantly being thrown at it. When in fact, we know how to improve our public schools. It's by fully funding them, by pushing for integrated schools, and by, pushing to have our schools do all the things we want them to do.
And we should say too, there's this, there's a lot there I want, but because I had just had interviewed for the show that we do on Peacock about these billionaires and their, this concept, this uniquely American concept of benevolent billionaires, which really at the end of the day, it's easier, I think, for people if they get hung up on the idea of the label of billionaire. Just think of it as more like a king without regional boundaries. They have this authority because they happen to sit on the throne. And, you could argue, well, they earned their throne, but so didn't kings, right? They fielded armies and they slayed their, and that's not really what we're looking for, I think, for a democracy. But talk about that central premise of our education being bad. Like, all of this is founded on this notion that our public school system is broken as opposed to needs improvement, right? Because broken implies like it's broken. You can't fix it. We need to abandon it. And that's the whole theory. We're going to close schools in Chicago. We're going to chuck these things away. But in fact, Jennifer, our public education system is not broken by any measure, right? It is overburdened, it seems, with societal ills. And in many ways, the portfolio that we expect out of public education is just far too great, and it's far too underfunded to maybe even pursue its full potential and its primary mission.
I think that the single most positive thing that's come out of the Biden administration so far is that we're going to be giving financial assistance to families with children, right? Like, this is really revolutionary for us, right? All the other industrial countries have some version of a guaranteed income for children, but we don't. We rely on the schools. And you can actually go back to 1965 when then President Johnson, pushes through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and look at the way they talk about how they're going to use education in order to provide for poor kids, for disadvantaged kids. And we've held on to this belief ever since. And the billionaires that you were talking about are very wedded to this idea. You can go back and listen to Michael Bloomberg during his short-lived presidential run. There he is on stage in South Carolina, and he's making this impassioned case that education is the surest way to move out of poverty. And as we saw through the passage of the Stimulus Act, actually the surest way is to raise people's incomes, right? And so, but you can see why billionaires who've benefited so handsomely from a structure that guarantees ever widening inequality would prefer something like education to, redistribution. And what we're really seeing now is that pendulum has begun to swing. The gap has become so outrageous that it's really hard now to make the argument with a straight face that schools are the things that are going to fix poverty and inequality. And so what we're left with then is this big question of, well, what is it that we want schools to do? Because all the expectations we've heaped on schools have been so unrealistic that they've really fed that sense of disappointment, right? Like, schools are supposed to fix poverty, but they never do. So that must mean that they're not working. We're at this interesting crossroads, another one where I think we're going to be having a big debate about what it is we expect our schools to do.
Yeah. What is, I want to ask where we are with that, in the context of COVID, in the context of I can't harp on this enough, so I'll say it again. The Rand Corporation was commissioned by the Gates Foundation to assess essentially their $1 to $2 billion investment in education over the past, really in the first decade of the century, but to some extent in the second decade as well. And their own study that they commissioned said, nope, totally, it was wrong, and we should go back and do what educators did. Now, that didn't get nearly the publicity I think like something like that should have, because that money and that presence implicated, that was a 10x, 20x, 100x return on that money in terms of shaping policy. But it feels like, at least prior to the pandemic, Jack, that reform movement, the corporate reform movement had if not died, lost its momentum and its power. And part of it, I think, is because it became DeVos as the face of it, and it was a little bit more naked. But even before Donald Trump, there was a sense that it was failing. There was pushback on this. Where are we going forward? And let me just, before you answer that, also ask, in this last COVID relief bill, Chuck Schumer, and I know why he did it, but Randy Weingarten signed on. I'm not as clear on why that. To provide about $5 or $6 billion for private schools to help kids, and ostensibly it was for kids who were low income. to me, that is a big part. It's Chuck Schumer worried about Hasidic parochial schools, frankly, but that's a lot of money, and it's sending the wrong signal. But so where are we going forward? I mean, the Biden administration on this program, we've said so far, he gets an incomplete. We need to see more work before we make a full assessment. But where are we going? Where is this going as a movement or the counter movement?
Yeah, well, big question there. I'm going to once more take one step back before taking a couple steps forward and say that, the rhetoric of the past 4 decades has been that America's schools are failing. And it's been rhetoric that has been used on both the right and the left. And it actually runs counter to what Americans themselves believe. So if you look at polling data, the vast majority of Americans feel pretty good about where their own kids go to school, but they'll tell you that the nation's schools are failing, right? Well, what does that mean, right? Both of those things can't be true at the same time, that the vast majority of kids are going to schools that their parents deem to be pretty good, but the nation's schools as a whole stink. And I think this toxic atmosphere has opened up all kinds of opportunities for highly interventionist, mostly wrong-headed reform. And so we saw this in terms of openings for the standards and accountability movement, openings for the charter school movement, openings for reforms led by billionaires. And I think we're finally at this moment where, as you said, Americans are pretty sick of it. Educators are sick of it. Communities no longer believe that reform is the answer. But I think we're in this crossroads because they also have been convinced that American public schools are in crisis, that the system is broken, and that something needs to be done. And so what I would love to see from the Biden administration is very clear messaging about the fact that our schools are not broken, that in fact, we have unfulfilled obligations to our schools and to the children who attend those schools. And that were we to fulfill those obligations, were we to push for racially and economically integrated schools, were we to push for fair funding mechanisms that ensure that every school has what it needs to educate the kids that it serves, were we to invest in the teaching profession such that we were bringing fully trained teachers into the classrooms and we knew that they'd be there for their whole careers. Were we to fulfill those promises, I think we would edge ever closer to this dream of a system that meets the needs of every kid in this country, but we would still need to meet their needs outside of school. Now, the Biden administration commit to meeting their needs outside of the school, or at least take some real steps in that direction. And so I think what we need is to place incredible pressure on this administration to do the same inside of education, to begin moving us towards these obligations that we can fulfill, to be moving in the right direction on those several very straightforward policies, right? Integration, funding, and support for the teaching profession.
Jennifer Berkshire, Jack Schneider, can't tell you what a pleasure it is to talk to both of you. The book is A Wolf at the Schoolhouse Door. The podcast is Have You Heard? We will put links to both of those at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here. See you, Sam.
And we're back. Great interview, Sam. I'm sure he's listening diligently on his vacation, but that was really fascinating, and I can't wait to check out the book. We have a few minutes before we head into the fun half. Why don't we do a little Trump content? Matt, how's that sound?
Yeah, he's back, folks. We actually get to see this guy. He's still alive. Yeah, I think maybe we can leave the commentary until after we play this video, but we should just note that it is at Mar-a-Lago, so he's not going to make his return at, a place that he's not going to cash in on. And it is at a wedding for a Florida car salesman. So
yeah, and just so you guys know, this is not his wax figure from the Disney Hall of Presidents come to life, even though they are sharing the same outfit.
Yeah, visually it really looks like that, but if you listen to it, it sounds like the old Trump that we knew and hated. So
You know, I turned off the news, I get all these flash reports, and they're telling me about the border, they're telling me about China, they're telling me about Iran. How are we doing with Iran? How do you like that? Well, they were ready to make it, they would have done anything, and this guy goes and drops the sanctions, and then he says, we'd like to negotiate now. We're not dealing with the United States, they don't want to deal with us. And China, the same thing, they never treated us that way, right? You saw what happened a few days ago, it was terrible. And the border's not good. The border is the worst anybody's ever seen it. And what you see now, multiply it times 10, Jim. You would know how to handle. He's the only one I know that might handle the border tougher than me. But we have to, and the tough is in the most humanitarian way, because that's what it is. What's happening to the kids, they're living squalor. They are living like nobody has ever seen anybody. There's never been anything like what's happening. And you're going to have hundreds, and you have it now. They have the airplane photos, the shops, and they call them shops. And these things.
Well, it just goes on and on like that. You know, it's fairly customary when you're giving a speech at a wedding to reference the people getting married. Not really Trump's way. He'd rather just do a rally speech in a tuxedo at a random wedding in Mar-a-Lago.
It's interesting the impulse that he still has. We'd do it, we'd be tough, but in a humanitarian way, which shows that that's not really campaign Trump. That's just Trump wanting to make sure he doesn't offend all like the more like maybe the wives in the audience that might be offended by such like naked cruelty.
Right. It's also pretty sad because you can hear kind of the bustling of waiters and people eating their food and all.
There's still a little bit more.
He wants a collection of warm bodies in order to relive the glory days. And yet he's just standing there swaying about with the microphone, doing retreads, slurring old things he used to say. It's like a washed up football star wearing his Letterman jacket at 35 and going back and, you know, doing Jaeger shots with the high school kids in the back of the parking lot. That's the vibe I get.
And also, I wish the Biden administration was being as weak on Iran as Trump is implying.
Exactly. I mean, we're gonna, continue.
Things are showing thousands and thousands of people coming up from South America. And it's just, look, it's a disaster. It's a humanitarian disaster from their standpoint, and it's going to destroy the country. And frankly, the country can't afford it because you're talking about massive, just incredibly massive amounts. Our school systems, our hospital systems, everything. So it's a rough thing. And I just say, do you miss me yet? Saying we did get 75 million votes. Nobody's ever got to that. They said, get 66 million votes, sir, and the election's over. Well, I got 75 million, and they said, but you know, you saw what happened. 10:30 in the evening, all of a sudden they said, that's a strange thing. Why are they closing up certain places, right? You know, a lot of things happening right now. I just wanted to say, it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to have you at Mar-a-Lago. You are a great and beautiful couple. And for many, many years, special, have fun.
You know, also another good rule of thumb for speeches is you don't just abruptly segue into something that was completely irrelevant. Perhaps he could have been more artistic with this and tried to tie the crisis at the border or the fact that obviously the election was stolen from him into how the bride stole the groom's heart, just like the election was stolen, or how they'll cross into each other's lives, like the massive amounts of illegal immigrants who are crossing the border. I mean, just like make it contextual, dude. You just, otherwise it's just like, come on, grandpa, time talking.
Well, what's happening at the border is a massive repudiation of the hard carceral approach on these sorts of things, because it's going to cause a massive backlog that border crossing should be treated like an administrative procedure, not a criminal one, and that this is what happens when you do that. And both parties, unfortunately, are willing to play into it. And until we can break out of that mindset, this is what's going to happen. So, he can. It's funny him doing what, like, and I think. I don't know. Like he wants to do it with in a more humanitarian way. Like, what would that have looked like? Why didn't you do that in 4 years?
Yeah. And you're exactly right. Again, he's critiquing just the effects of the small thinking nature of the non-systemic nature of the way the Biden administration is approaching immigration, and then also Iran. You mentioned it before we went back to the video, but none of these things that he's saying about the extreme nature of the Biden administration are true. And in fact, they've been center-right on immigration, center-right on foreign policy. I mean, we're going to praise, and we have praised, the stimulus package and for the fact that Biden hasn't shied away, and he seems to be trying to go big on infrastructure too. But in terms of those two topics, it's been same old, and not in a good way.
Absolutely.
All right, let's head into the fun half.
I need to plug, because Sam didn't let us plug on Friday. Now
I'm forgetting plugs. That's what happens when you sit here.
Yeah, we had Freebie Friday, and just kind of apathetically steamrolled right over the plug segment. But last Thursday night, on Left Reckoning, people go subscribe to the YouTube channel. I want to see, like, I'm gonna go check the analytics. I want to see like 100 people have subscribed. Come on, YouTube chat. You can navigate even off this page if you want for a little bit.
Matt's doing Brendan's out this week as well. So Matt's working hard. Reward him with a Left Reckoning subscription.
Yeah, I want to see a little bump. Because we had one Shama Sawan to talk about the recall effort and how to actually take on corporate power at the city level. So she's a great interview with her, and we're going to be doing more with her about throwing your weight around as once you actually build power. So Shama's great on that. Also, Wozni Lambre, we had a great discussion about the 1964 All-Star Game strike threat by Oscar Robertson. I'm blanking on a few of the other, wasn't McAdoo, maybe it was, but and Heinz on, like those guys, they threatened to not play the All-Star Game, which is the first televised one, because the NBA wouldn't recognize the Players Association. And that threat worked, and they got the Players Association. So Waz came to talk to us about that and about why Luka Doncic can toast two of the best defensive players that I name in the NBA, and Kawhi and Paul George every time. So we touched on that too, and also Seattle sports. So I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so I will stop plugging now.
Well, no, I think you sound fine. I mean, the fact that Luka Doncic he's so likable and he's so good, and the Knicks have the Mavericks first round pick this year, so it's like a real tearing at my heart, because I want to root for Luka Doncic, but it's difficult for me this year. And
I think I would have not, but he's too good to really he's too fun to watch.
And I was like, Kawhi Leonard's arguably my favorite player in the NBA, so all right, and the No McKee show does not air today, I believe, Matt, but check it out, subscribe, check out her show, and we're going to head into the fun half now. Stick around. We have a ton of funny clips, including a breaking Mike Lindell clip. You got that, Matt? Because that's especially nuts.
We will get that.
Awesome.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1 half. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Welcome to the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Let's take some calls. The phones are on. We have some people in the waiting room. Want to hear from you folks. Calling from a 305 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Romeo from Miami.
Romeo from Miami. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. I wanted to talk a little bit about. You mentioned this at the top about Bolivia.
Sure.
Man, it's really weird because obviously from Miami, there's definitely stereotypes about the kinds of people who come from Latin America. And I mean, my mom's Colombian. She has a lot of Latin American friends. She has like pretty right-wing politics in Colombia that are like really social democratic when they come to Miami. She like supported Bernie and stuff, but she really likes Uribe in Colombia. But yeah, I remember like having a friend over who, she was talking about how like horrible Evo Morales was and stuff like that. And it's like, these people are from Santa Cruz and, the like more right-wing state in Bolivia. And it just like, I think that like those kinds of people get like so much attention, but like it's just weird because there's like so many like left-wing Latin Americans who are also here. Like I have a friend who like his parents fought with the Sandinistas and like, they ended up coming here because it got really bad during the 80s when the U.S. was like, funding, like terrorist, attempts to overthrow their government. And it just, I don't know, it rubs me the wrong way when people are like, yeah, like Latin Americans or like, from Cuba or whatever are right wing, because it's like it's like a certain kind of people that are like focused in on the media and like a certain kind of people who like have this like political power that's amassed in Miami. And
right, it's class based, right? You see the class that people think of has more power and that such they're more visible.
And the ones that are
right, yeah.
They're pushed by the media and they're the right wing is, this probably better than me, but based on what I've read about, the right wing talk radio and the right wing media machine in the Miami area is quite potent and played a significant role in our politics and the rise of right wing talk radio in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's crazy here. And I mean, like, WhatsApp has like played a pretty big role in it too, because I maybe you guys reported on this a while ago. I like check in and out of the show, but you know, there was just not a lot of investment in like Latin American communities from you know, the part of the Democratic Party here. But you know, the Trump people were full force, and like a lot of those like Trump people like moved up and up that right wing ladder. And you know, they just invested more here, like on the ground and like in these like communication circles. I don't know, it's really frustrating, and it just seems like, I mean, you know, I get it, right? Like, Democrats don't give a shit like about winning elections sometimes, but like, I don't know. I have a friend who's like in the like state DNC now, and he's like exposing so much like just BS and corruption that's going on. Like they stopped paying health insurance for a while at like the end of November, and there were some employees who got operations and were just kind of left with the bill because the state party wasn't paying for it. And they had no idea.
Wow. I mean, it's amazing how we saw, I don't know what their finances are like right now, but we saw how basically Hillary's campaign was keeping the DNC's lights on for a while. So that doesn't shock me that they were skimping out after the election, because I'm sure they just emptied their coffers and really it gave it all to consultants, I'm sure. But thank you so much for your call. Great.
Yeah, I just say we can't wait for the Democrats to organize and actually, like, to the extent they're not in communities, that might be an asset. I don't know necessarily in Florida, you know, Dems can win Florida. I think other states where they're not, you know, paying attention, it might be just as well, because if they would, people, that brand is so toxic that, but you know, also, I know people in Florida's again a little bit different, but in Texas, there's not really the party there is so decrepit, the Democratic Party is so decrepit that you can actually get, if you have the time to try to rise in the party ranks, you can do it there, as opposed to say New York, which I frankly wouldn't even try here personally. And God bless everybody who's doing it, but it seems so Byzantine and like corruption soaked, that because it's been in power for so long, that I don't know. But
yeah, I guess like last thing real quick, if that's all right.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, like another big topic, at least in Florida, is immigration, because there are just so many, you know, like undocumented folks I mean, like obviously all over the country, but I mean, if I had to guess, there's a pretty big concentration like here, California and Texas probably. But I mean, it was just a really big letdown, you know, with Obama, and a lot of people just got so, you know, like disillusioned, right? Like I remember my mom who I used to live with, she was undocumented, and I remember in like 2013 or 2014, like sitting down on the couch with her watching Obama give that address on like his big plan for immigration. It's like, dude, it's been 6 years. Like, why is it taking so long? And, you know, nothing happened. And my mom ended up giving up, and she moved back to Colombia, and she, you know, fortunately she's doing better over there, like economically and stuff. But it's a big letdown, man. And, you know, that kind of stuff has really big implications. You know, like people just, they don't believe the Democrats can fix things when they see, you know, Obama kind of like flub it for 8 years. But I don't know if that's something we're going to have to reckon with. And I appreciate what you guys do. You know, the work that you guys do is really sick. And I've put people on the show, and, you know, I love that you're on, Emma, now. You're doing great filling in the show. And I look forward to seeing just how the show grows over the next few years.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it, Romeo. You know, all the best to your mom. That's just, hearing how the Democratic Party fails people, it just never fails to get me enraged. So I really appreciate it.
Yep. Have a good one.
Have a good one. Bye.
And the only way that they can fix that is actually doing stuff, right? Like they have to continue to deliver. And if things get left on the table, like the PRO Act and HR 1, and if they don't, you know, continue the child poverty stuff, or expand healthcare access, like that's what's going to happen. And people can do whatever type of acrobatics they want during campaign season to think that can fix the problem. But ultimately, the only way to do this is like what Lula did, is to give people so much material support that they're literally getting taller because they're escaping poverty.
Yeah. I mean, couldn't agree more. This is part of why we're, it can't just be the stimulus packages, or it can't just be relief packages from COVID. This has to be sustained. And beyond that, obviously, H.R. 1, PRO Act, infrastructure, just spend. Take a page out of the Republicans' playbook and don't care about the ramifications of putting your agenda in place based on, or political ramifications. Because if you just improve people's lives, it's going to be a lot easier for you. Let's take another call. Calling from a 540 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Chris from Virginia. How you doing?
Chris from Virginia. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Well, I don't know if you mentioned it at the top of the show because I wasn't on, but I'm pretty sure the last time it was just you two guys and Sam and Brendan weren't there. We lost Rush Limbaugh, so I'm sure the right wing is quaking over what might happen.
Right. You're right. It must be
just
the power of Matt and myself being a duo for the show.
Has Prager got a physical lately?
So actually the reason why I called was I watched on YouTube, there was a video, and I don't know when it originally you guys did it, but you were talking to a guy that did the socialist test or whatever. And
from Friday.
I'm not like a socialist scholar or anything. I do call myself a socialist. But I had to turn that interview off after about 20 minutes. I think the video was 40. So he may have gotten better as the interview went along, but that was painful to listen to. Like, I'm pretty sure he actually did the socialism is when government does stuff meme. It was pretty bad.
Are we talking about Carl last week? I don't know if he necessarily did that. I mean, he was his I'll just say, like, for my part, I was interested to hear him the sort of destroy the distinction between personal and private property in a way that I think
so that's really what got me is
right. Okay.
If you can't explain the difference between personal property and private property in about 2 sentences, then you don't know what you're talking about. Like I'm with the IWW, and so I talk to people about unionizing all the time, and I try to not use big words when I talk about it. About 15 minutes into the interview, he brought up Marx, and if you bring up Marx within 10 minutes of talking to somebody, you've lost the conversation, right? Like, you can talk about socialist and leftist philosophy and ideas without ever mentioning the word Marx, because you will turn tons of people off.
Well, I think it was more tailored for Sam. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's different when you're talking to Sam a little bit. I mean, I would take your
advice
guidance on that, but yeah,
regular about people that don't work as a political talk show host.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. It's just I looked through the other comments in the video too, and it just looked like a lot of people were like, this doesn't even make sense that you would have this guy on. So I don't know his bona fides, but
I like Carl. I will say I read Carl's blog and I find him very good on things. I think this was the yes or no nature and the way he was defining certain things wasn't how I am familiar with it. However, but I don't know. I think I get your point, but I'll just say I do like Carl. And think he's very smart on a lot of topics, but I was a little bit behind on that interview as well.
We welcome and appreciate the critique, though, so I appreciate it. Thank you for.
Yeah, and it's not you guys; it's it was him.
Hey, I mean, critique us too, if you feel like you should.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, you guys have a good day.
You too. Thanks so much. All right. Let's take one more call and then we'll just do some videos and then we'll take a few more calls after that. How's that sound? Okay.
That's great. We'll do Mike Lindell next.
Yes. Calling.
You got some great wall art, I just want to say.
Yeah. Calling from an 828 number.
Oh, yes. Hello. This is Casey from South Carolina.
Casey from South Carolina. What can we do for you?
Yeah, first I wanted to give like a quick tip since a bunch of states have just made their vaccines available to the general public or are about to, you kind of have to like dig around for it, but you can usually like schedule an appointment through the Department of Health. I don't know if that will help anybody. I'm trying to like compile a list of some kind. I don't know. Yeah. So what I wanted to talk about was just like this idea of accountability in politics. Like, I'm kind of like confused and frustrated by where this buzzword came from. I think that like it sort of suggests a lack of understanding of how power works. I don't know what y'all's thoughts might be on that.
I'm curious what you think. I also haven't found it the most useful concept. I think accountability would be nice, but I don't think it super exists in the context of American politics right now. So yeah, I'm curious if you have any more thoughts on it.
Yeah. So, I mean, for one, sort of related to what the caller from Miami said about like, Democrats and the Democratic Party, it just seems it can seem kind of silly to me to try to hold them accountable because it's like, so see, like, for example, just recently, some people protested the South Carolina Democratic Party headquarters to hold them accountable for raising the minimum wage, even though that like they expressed support for that like last month. I mean, even if like that sentiment is genuine or whatever, it's just that like on the sort of like higher up levels, it's just like, come on, like, do you really expect the ruling class and their acolytes to act against their best interests?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think I don't know, Emma, do you want to go on first?
Sure. No, so I think accountability, you're right. It can be a concept that may not be as effective electorally as we wish. But what is your solution, Casey, do you think, in terms of holding politicians to their word, I guess? I mean, I think...
Right, I just want to jump in here. Like, the Senate is made to not have those people accountable, right? Like, Sinema had a hell of a lot of flack, and that maybe would have done something if she was a congressperson. She's not up in 2022, is she? She's not up for a while. Yeah. So like, I think when it comes to Congress people, yeah, I think like holding, say, like people want to hold AOC more accountable to hold more like left-wing positions. I think it's frankly really difficult to do that until the caucus has people that are to the left of her and can like model that position. I think she like, and I don't think any sort of, particularly on AOC, like I don't think any sort of deep dive into her college writings is going to tell you anything more than what the inevitable caucus looks like that's surrounding her is going to determine how accountable she is. And I think that goes on a state level too, right? Like it comes from like wider than just one single politician. It comes from like actually having a organized left that can do something, and actually put more people into power than just like an odd AOC here or there in a safe district.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I think just to build off of Matt's point, holding individual politicians accountable for their own actions, that's part of it. But a lot of it is just increasing the numbers of politicians who would even be open to being accountable to the left. And so that has to do with organizing and getting the right kinds of people in office more. And I think, and that's something I guess I would add on to it.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess like as far as solutions go, I think that like my general advice is to really focus on leverage. I think that's sort of the name of the game and like what is within your power. Like, so, you know, as an example for the that, you know, protesting, what's more within our control is, say, raising the state minimum wage. And so the process you might want to go about is just, you know, finding people who are on your side, forming a coalition, you know, identifying with like laser precision exactly who or what is standing in the way, and then sort of like as an organized group, you know, addressing and overcoming those obstacles. Because I think like in major political change in the past, like I don't think that really took place through like holding politicians accountable. Like in some cases, you just had to force their hand.
I appreciate the call. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good one.
You too. All right. We will be taking some more calls a little bit later, but let's get into Mike Lindell. Mike Lindell is, to my knowledge, no longer welcome on even the lowest of the low, OAN, in terms of conspiracy peddling. I haven't seen him on there in a little bit because they're facing lawsuits from Dominion, I believe, as is Mike Lindell, a $1.3 billion lawsuit. But that doesn't prevent him from continuing to spout conspiracy theories. He has a declaration that will shock the pants off of the corrupt mainstream media. Let's take a listen.
What I'm talking about, Steve, is what I have been doing since January 9th. All the evidence I have, everything is going to go before the Supreme Court, and the election of 2020 is going bye-bye. It was an attack by other country, communism coming in. I don't know what they're going to do with it after they pull it down, but it's
hang on a second.
Donald Trump will be
go ahead.
back in
wait.
August. Donald Trump will be back in office in August.
So, once again, the only media outlet that seems to welcome Mike Lindell back is Steve Bannon's whatever that is, right? But he even has to temper him. That's Mike Lindell promising that Donald Trump will be back in office in August. So now we have a third date that we have to worry about QAnoners storming the Capitol at this point in order to put Trump back. The guy's, you know, doing rambling wedding speeches at Mar-a-Lago. I don't even think he'd want to come back. He just wants to make it known that it was stolen from him, and so he can save his own ego. He's out to lunch.
I don't want it anymore. He ruined it. It's not even fun anymore.
Yeah, Biden, he changed all the decorations. Not everything is fully plated gold anymore. The Trump signs taken down.
This is one thing I liked about Matt Christman's approach to the QAnon people was he basically did what James Randi used to do to psychics, which is like challenge them to make a specific prediction that can be falsifiable. So look, good on Steve Bannon for getting this freak on, I guess, because we need to hear more of his ramblings, to actually put himself on the clock. So I assume, I mean, gosh, who knows what Mike Lindell's health is going to be like come fall? I don't know. But if he's still around, we'll see.
Elevated, I might.
Yeah.
And good point, Matt. But as I've mentioned on the show, the phenomenon that still never gets, that still shocks me is that there are televangelists out there who still participate and rake in millions of dollars from their followers who predicted the world was going to end in 2012 on a specific date or whatever. You think that being disproven in this area is going to stop Mike Lindell from grifting and using his MyPillow QAnon coupon codes for people? Please.
Do you remember where you were the 2012 day that the world was supposed to end?
I do not, but I graduated high school in 2012, so... Oh, yes, I actually do, Matt. I do. I do. Yeah. I was with, like, my friends at school. We all made, like, a big deal about it when it was 12/12.
Right. It was 12/12. See, mine was May. It was the May in was May 21st, 2012, maybe, or something like that. There was a first date.
It's because I graduated in the summer, so it wouldn't have been 12/12. So I actually do remember that now.
But I was on a flight to London to go intern and do a study abroad thing there, and honestly, I felt it a little bit. I'm a skeptic. I don't believe in any sort of supernatural, but I'm like, you know what? What if there's something, and it turns out I just slept through my flight and woke up with jet lag. So that's one way to experience the end of the world, is flying over the Atlantic.
Yeah, that is one way. I do remember that oddly, because I think I had a few what ifs myself, but looks like we're still here to tell the tale. So, we have a date for Mike Lindell. Maybe he will stop talking about Trump losing the election past that August date, but I wouldn't hold your breath, because then you might be on the verge of your heart exploding, much like Mike Lindell.
Let's do number 8, I think, if you don't mind.
Sure. I need to open the Slack just to remember what number 8 is. Oh,
it's a brilliant performance. Is it award season? I don't know. I have no idea. It always seems like it's award season.
Yes. All right. I'll slide us into this.
Okay.
Representative John Joyce has a really good idea to combat the #1 problem in the United States. He said this to Dana Perino. This is his grand plan.
Congressman John Joyce joins us now. What kind of reaction have you had to this bill being introduced?
Dana, good morning. The reaction has been so positive. You and I realize that the cancel culture is rapidly attacking.
So if you can't see,
I just want to say, listen to this guy's delivery for authenticity and see if he actually believes anything he's saying right now. But yeah, you want to describe the and to think I saw it on Mulberry Street.
Yes, because no one gave a shit about the Mulberry Street Dr. Seuss book, so he has to make it seem like it's targeting the beloved ones, aka Grinch Act being in the title. So his initial quote that she showed here before he came on says, "As we have seen time and time again, the woke horde will target just about anyone, even Dr. Seuss. We must not allow the left to wage further attacks on students' First Amendment rights." Apparently this is all for the kids, and he says the enthusiasm, particularly from probably, high school students and everybody who would care about this, has been overwhelming.
Yeah, let me see the racist Dr. Seuss. I need it for my free speech. It's 5th grade.
They can roll it, use it for joint papers. That was high school.
Congressman John Joyce joins us now. What kind of reaction have you had to this bill being introduced?
Dana, good morning. The reaction has been so positive. You and I realize the cancel culture is rapidly attacking our American institutions, our libraries, our school. And like so many, I'm alarmed at the left's attempt to cancel historic books, characters. No one is safe from the woke culture. Not
Okay,
even
so
Dr. Seuss.
What would your legislation?
Oh, hold on one second.
Yeah.
Having are you still there? I'm thinking I'm having a little bit of an internet problem.
It's all good.
Give me 1 second. We may have to come back to this. Can you go to a phone call? We'll
no problem. All right.
I think I'm back. Yeah.
All right.
Think so.
Why don't we let's cover that clip in a second. First,
Okay.
Go to the Bernie thing. So Bernie Sanders went and spoke in favor of the Bessemer, Alabama unionization effort. 56 or 5,800 Amazon warehouse workers, I believe it's 5,800, are going to be deciding their fate on unionization, voting today. We won't know for a few days, most likely, what the final results will be, because there's going to be some sort of messy count, most likely, as there are independent people verifying it. But Bernie Sanders went down. He did what Obama said he was going to do and walk the picket line, right? Put his walking shoes on and stand arm in arm with people fighting to unionize. Bernie Sanders did that over the weekend.
And what we know is if we are interested in expanding a middle class which has been shrinking for decades, the only way to do it is to grow the union movement, and you are in the forefront of that struggle. So I say to you, you may not know it or not, but what you're doing is historical. Historical. Because all over this country, people are sick and tired of being exploited, sick and tired of not having the dignity that they deserve. And your message to people all over this country is stand up and fight back. You're going to do it here. We can do it all over this country. We can grow the middle class. We can make sure that all of our working people can live with the respect and dignity that they deserve. This country belongs to all of us, not just a handful of billionaires.
Yeah, well, that's a classic line of his at the end, but it really is awesome to see. And, you know, we praised Joe Biden for going further than a Democratic president has gone, or any president for that matter, since the Reagan era, maybe even before, of actually supporting the unionization effort. He, in theory, supports the PRO Act, but may not be in favor of getting rid of the filibuster in order to actually pass it. How strong are your convictions? Same with the $15 minimum wage, but I digress. That's a real person who is standing alongside working people. Bernie Sanders, you have no question about where he stands on this issue. And this is such an important watershed moment for labor rights in this country, which were beaten down for decades and decades of not just right to work policies, but of Supreme Court decisions that just stripped unions of the powers that they used to have. And that was a deliberate right-wing turn by not just the Republican Party, but by the Democratic Party as well. And so this is a watershed moment, what's happening in Alabama. And Amazon is scared shitless, and they should be, but so should other companies throughout the country. Because if Amazon can be taken on by workers, and there can be a real potent unionization effort, and they can succeed with all of the obstacles that were put in front of them, with all of the intimidation, with all of the tactics used by Amazon and the law firms that they hired, then it can happen anywhere. And that's what needs to be communicated, and that's what Bernie Sanders lending his voice to this, I believe, communicates.
Absolutely.
So let's, Matt, do you want to get back to that, or do you want me to take a call? Because I know.
Yeah, let's double back. I want to try see if we can play. Let me know how it's coming through here, because I think my internet dies a little bit when I try to play this. But we'll not James Joyce.
Not James Joyce. John Joyce went on Dana Perino's show to highlight his Grinch Act. Let's take.
Yes, of course.
Congressman John Joyce joins us now. What kind of reaction have you had to this bill being introduced?
Dana, good morning. The reaction has been so positive. You and I realize that the cancel culture is rapidly attacking our American institutions, our libraries, our school. And like so many, I'm alarmed at the left's attempt to cancel historic books, characters. No one is safe from the woke culture. Not even Dr. Seuss.
What would your legislation do specifically?
The Grinch Act would prevent our taxpayers' dollars from supporting states and local governments that ban books. I'm someone who visits the libraries throughout Pennsylvania, my district in South Central and Southwestern Pennsylvania. Dana, yesterday, I was in one of those libraries. They took me into the children's section and showed me the shelf full of Dr. Seuss books. If you find that these books are offensive to your children, then the parents should be the ones who make that.
Wait, so they were there? Okay.
That decision. Government should not be making that, and federal dollars should not support anyone who bans books.
The government is not making this decision. It is the estate of Dr. Seuss and the publisher. So this isn't anyone. No one's being canceled here.
Well, I would also just say, like,
with Dr. Seuss's family if you want them to go against the estate's wishes. I would love for him to come with his little rehearsed speech in his kind of clumsy effort to make a splash on the national scene by introducing a Grinch Act. See how they feel about it, because I don't think you really have any say in this private matter.
The other thing is that there's a finite amount of library space. I don't know what kind of libraries this guy is going into. And I would just say any library that does make the decision to stop shelving the Dr. Seuss books that the publisher isn't even publishing anymore would probably be justified in doing so. And for anybody who worries that that's going to memory hold Dr. Seuss, the answer is to get rid of fucking copyright. That is lifetime and a million years on top of that. Like, it should be about 20 years, and anything after that should be uploadable as a PDF, so all these people can look at like the funny cartoons of Chinese people that Dr. Seuss wrote that they're really worried about missing, or black people. Although
they're worried about their kids, the educational value of anti-Asian cartoons, right, Matt?
Stereotypes. Yeah, if you didn't wake up with or grow up with the same stereotypes as me, then what's this country going to come to? But let's just play a little bit more of this, because I find his performance just stunning.
He's a terrible actor, and he's so obviously reading and also nervous for his big Dana Perino debut.
Should not support anyone who bans books. Our First Amendment rights, those of our adults and our children, must be defended.
Okay, so then have you had any Democrats agree to sign on to this bill?
I think this is a bill that should be able to reach across the aisle. We have to understand that we cannot turn back and ban great historic people, great historic images that are part of our childhood. As a child, my father read to me from Dr. Seuss. I read Dr. Seuss to my children, and now I read it to my granddaughter. There are important lessons in these books, but the parents are the ones who should be guiding the children, not government. We don't need to be woke.
So
the government isn't. God damn it.
And I want to make a broader point on this, which is this is all about, like in Idaho, I think it was, cutting 50 or so classes at the university system that things like social issues and history, those sorts of woke degrees. Obviously they like to focus on gender studies and critical race theory, but they also talk about history if you read close enough. And that's what this is about. This is about basically they're doing McCarthyism and saying they're anti-McCarthyite. This is a attempt to impose discipline ideologically on things like George Washington is a nice guy, and let's not emphasize the slave system that created him and the oligarchs that helped him break with Britain, right? Like, that's what this is all about. And I will say it's silly, but it is, the reason that they're still on it is because it's the thing that the regular Joe can sort of relate to about them. Because without getting into any of the actual issues, everyone feels like they've said something and they've been needlessly, or especially white people, who they're trying to go for, needlessly censored about it, right? Like, you can't say anything anymore. This is decades old, trope, and it's really the only thing they have going for them. Because right now we're at a situation where all their stuff about tightening your belts and not spending money is ridiculous.
Yeah, and it involves nostalgia, so they get to kind of hit at that emotional element of it too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, he's like, we need to protect our kids' First Amendment rights. No kid gives a shit about Dr. Seuss anymore. They're watching I can't even name the shows they're watching on DuckTales.
No, that's really little kids. The kid, what's that show that we like? We played that clip of that was insanely woke. Is Mindy and Cindy or something?
Oh, I don't know. I do know that Paw Patrol's canceled, but let's see. The most popular kids shows in America right now: SpongeBob's still crushing it. Yeah. Paw Patrol, Sesame Street, Tumbleleaf, Steven Universe, Peppa Pig. That's a British one, I think. Interesting. Look at this wokeness already infiltrating fatherly.com. Peppa Pig might perpetuate terrible parental stereotypes. Daddy Pig is pretty much a full-on idiot. Oh, I mean, that seems a bit men's rightsy, but I won't wade into Peppa Pig anymore without doing more research.
Door Knocker writes in, says, did you see Governor Kristi Noem get into a Twitter fight with Lil Nas X over his Satan shoes yesterday? She said, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, if ever there was a target worthy of being canceled, it would be Lil Nas X. Here we have an elected governor,
Right.
cancel a rapper and performatively quoting scripture to revive satanic panic. Yeah, I mean, Lil Nas X was attempting to be provocative. I've never heard in my life of an artist doing such a thing. It's the end.
Yeah, I mean, this is all anxiety over not having the power to do this anymore, right? Like the Sister Soldier thing with Bill Clinton, the reactionaries were so powerful that they got the Democratic Party to do stuff like that, which, I mean, they still will occasionally do that to gain some kind of currency, but now they don't have that power. Like, I mean, I think did Lil Nas X apologize, or was that a troll too? I don't know. Either way, he's very good at getting people's attention. And yeah, I mean, they wish they could cancel this stuff. Dixie Chicks are another good example.
Oh my God. I mean, I love all that stuff. I love when, you know, pop stars basically use their currency in order to just make things as provocative and ridiculous as possible. I loved it when Lady Gaga did it. I love it when Lil Nas X does it. I love just triggering the right wing about this, because it just, even more than the cathartic element for me, it tugs at the phrase of society and really does open things up in the long run. So I'm all for it. All right. Actually, before we get to some IMs and calls, I really think we should cover this Echo Park thing, because I think it's pretty important. If you don't mind, Matt.
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay. So right now, or I guess over the weekend, it's ongoing in Los Angeles, Echo Park. The police are attempting to clear out the park where there was a large houseless encampment of people living there for quite a long time. Obviously, there is a significant issue in Los Angeles with houselessness. And back a few years ago, Prop HHH was passed, which promised that funds would be allocated to build 10,000 units of affordable housing, or housing for houseless people. That hasn't happened. It's been pushed back continuously. Only 489 units have been made ready out of that 10,000, based on what was promised by Garcetti and people in Los Angeles. And now the protests are turning intense and violent. First, let's turn to Steve Goot. He's a camera person I've worked with in the past. He's a great reporter and cameraman. He was at those protests. Let's look at a little bit of his footage. You can find it on his Instagram account, and he's worked with me at TYT, done a bunch of great work in the past as well. Here he was at those protests, and then they also were arresting reporters too. That's just some of the images that we saw. You can see the full video. I don't want to call it a video essay, but just all of the footage that Steve collected. Steve Goot, you can look him up. Here's some footage of a reporter from, I believe it was Spectrum News, being arrested after, or not arrested, but some reporters were arrested. Kate Cagle of Spectrum News 1 was separated by the LAPD from her camera crew for no discernible reason whatsoever.
Wait, I'm with Spectrum News 1. They have my name. Wait, I have to stay with my crew. They have their... Okay, you'll be fine. Well, I have to stay with my crew. They need to come with me. I promised I would stay with my crew.
So your video was a little choppy there, Matt, but that was this reporter being taken away as she repeatedly says, I have to stay with my crew, I have to stay with my crew. And multiple officers grab her by her arms and usher her away. And the LA Times reported that journalists, members of the press from less well-known outlets were literally detained. And it was a part of what police have been doing repeatedly to independent reporters. I saw it all the time at Standing Rock. An attempt to kind of push back the threshold for what they've decided they consider a member of the press and cracking down on them. And all of this is happening in LA. The LAPD is presiding over and pushing forward these tactics. And all of this is in order to clear out a park because houseless people have been living there, and the city reneged on its promise to build affordable housing. And yet, who's bearing the brunt of the violence? Of course, the protesters and, most importantly, the houseless people in Los Angeles.
I'll try that again.
Yeah, so we can see.
Wait, I'm with Spectrum News 1. They have my name. Wait, I have to stay with my crew. They have their... Okay, you'll be fine. Well, I have to stay with my crew. They need to come with me. I would stay with my crew.
So she repeatedly says that, and they continue to take her away. Spectrum News is reputable, I guess. You know, I don't even want to say that because all news outlets should be treated with the same deference. But Spectrum News is established and well known. And if that's how they're treating a reporter from Spectrum, think about how they're treating all the independent reporters who didn't have a camera crew that could film as she was being taken away. It's no shock that these are the tactics the LAPD is engaging in, but it's important to talk about, especially given what they're serving here. Good, Matt?
And yeah, I'm good. Sorry about that internet, folks. Was it a little bit better the second time I played it?
A little bit better. Let's take a call here. Calling from a 253 number.
Hey, this is Tony in Echo Park.
Oh, wow. Perfect timing, Tony in Echo Park.
Perfect. I was so happy to hear you guys talking about it. You know, I don't know if people know Echo Park. It's like a tiny subsection of Los Angeles. It's historically one of the most liberal places or progressive places in the country. Like Charlie Chaplin lived here. Film originated here. 2 of the first film studios were here, and it, you know, historically, like during the McCarthy era, it used to be called Red Hill because the views on this side of town were just way too progressive. And now if you get on Nextdoor, you looked at any of the conversation that's happening, it's a lot of people talking about how they're taxpayers and that this is a public space and that, you know, as a taxpayer, they deserve the park, and these homeless people aren't taxpayers, quote unquote. You know, it's classist arguments. And honestly, it's really frustrating to see millions of dollars be spent on the police. There were probably 8 helicopters in the air for about 12 hours, just hovering. I don't know what tactical advantage the homeless would have on a helicopter, but they needed 8. And then I'm getting ID'd to walk home. You know, it felt like Afghanistan. And we probably spent $2 million on LAPD, and the park's going to be closed for 3 months. And I'm not sure who we're doing this for. You know, the most frustrating part about it is that the biggest complaint is that the park is dirty. But the reason the park is dirty is because the city cut off trash collection about 4 months ago. And I go down to the park every day. I bring food down there, I brought tents. You talk to these people, and the city stopped picking up the trash on purpose because they wanted to create a mess. And then after they stopped picking up the trash, they started systematically disabling all the power in the park and for the 3 blocks surrounding the park. So Mike, one of the people I talked to down there that I see, couldn't charge his phone anymore. So the day-to-day work that he did have offered was no longer possible because he literally had to walk 4 blocks to charge his phone. And it's just unbelievable that we can have such a liberal city with so many people, and you can sort of lose all humanity just because these people are living on the street. And I don't know if it's that people want to look down on someone or what it is, but it's just so disappointing.
Yeah, it's this internalized resentment that a lot of people feel for people who don't have means in a society of capitalism that equates goodness with material. and they're not bothering anybody. They're a part of the park. Or, I mean, if they are bothering anybody, it's incredibly tangential to people's lives. And yet you can have this brute militarism that services just the smallest amount of convenience for everyday people, fueled by that very resentment. It's hard to grapple with that aspect of our humanity.
There's something about it. So we spend about $500 million a year on homeless services, and we have about 65,000 homeless adults. There's about 800 people that live in their cars in Echo Park. There's another, like, probably 3,500 that are on the street, and the park was supporting, I want to say, about 1,000 people probably. And it's unbelievable to me that we can sort of set up these structures and spend all this money. And if you turn that into just direct UBI for people, you could probably take that same budget and give every homeless person $300 a month safely. But how we get that legislation without people, talking about it being exceptional or thinking people are going to pretend to be homeless for $300. And honestly, if you pretend to be homeless for $300, like, take the money.
Yeah, and that's such obviously a fantasy about what would happen, which is not the case. The other thing that's playing into this, and I don't know if you can speak to this dynamic, but since you're from Echo Park Lake, the prices of housing there have gone through the roof, from what I've read. And I don't know if you know anything about Prop HHH and the fact that the promises have been broken about affordable housing as well.
Yeah, so I voted for HHH, and I think it was $1.2 billion that we approved, and it seems like it's being held up. It's private contractors, and they're divvying up the money, and they're trying to make the units as expensive as possible. And I don't know where all the $500 million goes, but I do know that in Echo Park, I've lived here for about 10 years, and my neighbors in my building pay roughly twice as much rent as I pay. And it's just because I've kept my lease, and they can only raise it 5% a year if I don't leave, but literally everywhere else around me is paying 200 or 300% for the same exact spot. It's not Hong Kong level bad, but it is amazing to me that we've got so many vacancies in the city, but we're still building new high-rises, and the only thing that stopped half of Echo Park getting torn down for a high-rise was actually COVID. And so if that hadn't happened, we'd have more luxury units going in. And, I generally can tell how the economy is doing by how many people I have to step over to get to my car.
Yeah, I mean, poetic in a really dark way, and very well said. And it's amazing to me how they still think the solution to solving a houselessness crisis is contracting out the building of affordable housing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I don't know if people are aware or just not paying attention, but it is a problem when the only advocacy that happens for homelessness is when these sort of, yuppies want their park back. And it's not necessarily advocacy if it's a quid pro quo.
California Bernie Gal writes in, the Echo Park Lake sweep was a dry run of what is going to happen all over Southern California as the 2028 Olympic Games in LA gets closer.
I was worried he was going to say when the eviction moratoriums end.
Well, it could be both.
Yeah, so I'll let you guys go. Thanks so much. Love the show.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Tony's your name, you said?
Yep.
Tony from Echo Lake Park. Thanks so much for calling in. Echo Park Lake. I don't know. Jeez. Ay. I try my best. Calling from a 214 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Lawton from Texas. How you doing?
Lawton from Texas. I'm doing well. How about you?
Pretty good. So I was actually wanting to talk about things involving education standards, especially down in southern states where I'm from. Like, I'm sure you've heard of a bunch of like things being interjected into the curriculum, like and textbooks being changed to call slaves indentured servants in recent times. Trump and DeSantis has pushing patriotic education.
Yes.
I don't want to underplay those, but I actually wanted to talk about a different angle and the biggest problem that I have run into during my time in school.
Sure.
And what my problems have involved actually individual teachers. And I just want to say, as a lefty, I agree with every other lefty that teachers are the most undervalued, underpaid employees in our country. But they also have a certain amount of control over their own curriculum, and that they get to choose the angle they approach it from. That's not inherently a bad thing because it makes them a little more free and makes their job a little easier and stuff. But the problem is that some of the teachers I've had down here are fucking batshit crazy. So, yeah, I just wanted to give a few of like the more extreme examples I've run into. One example is like I had a middle school science teacher who told us not to read Charles Darwin's Origin of the Species because it's boring. I also had a science teacher who taught earth and space science in my senior year of high school, and he was a climate change denier. And I'm finishing up my basics at a community college right now, and honestly, it's been even worse here. Like I've had several teachers who would go on like right-wing rants. I had an English teacher who would find a reason to rant about AOC while teaching all the time. But the most severe example I've run into was a couple semesters ago. I had a world history professor, and this guy was well respected around the campus. And I had several friends say, "Oh, this guy's really cool. He's really nice and a good teacher and everything." So I got him, and he clearly loved what he was doing, and he was like energetic and everything. But this guy taught some insane shit, man. Like, he taught us that eugenics was a left-wing progressive idea. He would like find a way to blame every world atrocity in history on the left. He taught us, of course, that Nazis were left-wing, and literally while describing Nazi economic policy, would do a Bernie Sanders impression. And like,
so yeah, all right.
Yeah, so
that's pretty insane. We have a bunch of calls, so I'm gonna let you go in a second. But let me just say, I sympathize with that, and I think a lot of that can be a bit regional sometimes in where you find your views. But you can't eliminate that in any profession. You know, I've met doctors who, with a straight face, were pushing hydroxychloroquine and are, you know, a little bit anti-vax at this moment.
Yeah.
You can eliminate that, but your point is well taken, and there is a lot of ideological diversity, and I think part of what the Texas infrastructure allows for is the belief that saying things like that in the classroom is okay, and actually acceptable and in line with the agenda being pushed from the top down in the state. So I think that that's kind of what aids and abets it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. My question was just going to be like how we, God damn it, I can't talk today, but
it's okay.
But, how we would like crack down on that without making life hard on teachers who are actually trying to do the job right and not injecting dangerous misinformation. Like obviously the examples I listed weren't just an example of teachers who are conservative, but like teaching, like, yeah.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Lon, for your call. Have a good one.
Oh, thank you. You too.
Later. All right, we're going to take a few more calls. Calling from a 647 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Warren from Toronto.
Warren from Toronto, what you talking about? What would you like to talk about today? I had a really bad night's sleep last night, so if
no problem.
Yeah.
What you talking about, Willis, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be calling into the Emma Vigeland program today. And so I guess my question is, it's kind of and it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately and have been seeing around and just having personal conversations a bit, is that, I guess for you and Matt, like, what do you think was the thing that transitioned you from a more kind of like centrist liberal politics to something on the left? And the reason why I've been thinking about it a lot lately is just from, I guess, the Canadian perspective, is that, and I don't want to take up too much time, but kind of Trudeau, for a lot of people my age, was, when he was on the stage, he was supposed to be this super progressive guy, and then they were disappointed when he didn't deliver that change, things like proportional voting and all of that. And I kind of saw people go kind of three ways. I saw people check out of the system entirely out of disappointment. I saw people go to the right wing because that's how jaded they were from Trudeau. And then I saw people like me go to the left wing. And even at that time, I was mostly like an NDP guy, but I'm like, okay, I was hopeful about Trudeau, if not skeptical. And I could kind of see something where this is also the risk of Biden not delivering on, and fingers crossed he gets you guys at minimum wage. But of course, as both of you know, there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical. But I also kind of see that as a risk, where I hear a lot of the commentators, the lefties online, talk about, being very jaded with how Obama went. And I just find that connection between how these politicians, usually of kind of like the centrist level, who run on progressive rhetoric, when they don't deliver on that, it's interesting seeing just how that moves people ideologically.
Great points. I think for me, I'll just speak to my personal transition from, I was obsessed with Obama in the 2008 run, and in the primary, that's really what got me into politics in the way that I'm into it now. I couldn't understand why anyone would support Hillary Clinton over Obama, who was talking about how unjust the war was and how Hillary Clinton voted for the war. That was my beginning. I was 14. And that was the beginning of my political kind of rebirth or enthusiasm. And then when Obama broke a lot of promises, I think that's where I saw my perspective shifting a lot. And so I think that also gives me a bit of perspective on why I'm more appreciative in some ways of the fact that the Biden administration isn't engaging in austerity politics with the stimulus right now, because it was so fucking bad in the Obama years, especially when they had 60 votes in the Senate. It was just a ridiculous facade and farce, and I couldn't stand it at the time. So it increased my cynicism, but I think it also gave me perspective on what we're seeing right now. Matt, I don't know if your internet's allows you to.
Yeah, I can answer. So my upbringing was vaguely Republican, although on my mom's side of the family, you have a lot of farmers and those were Democrats, but sort of like a conservative type of a Democrat, maybe. The Iraq War was also my first sort of radicalizing thing, and that definitely made me support Obama because of that. That was his top line. I would say, as far as moving further left than that, it is just gaining a wider understanding of how malevolent like reaction is and the role it plays in history. So like whether it's looking at something as structural supposedly as poverty, right? And people sort of understand like capitalism creates poverty. It's not like it's a byproduct or an externality. Like poverty is valuable to capitalists because it makes the labor force more servile. And understanding like, and I think in the context of the last, the CARES Act and all this stuff, we're seeing that is just a choice. We could make it go away like that. But people might not have to show up to their shitty boss. And so like that fundamental, like understanding poverty, I think, is not something that like, oh, we just need to figure out how to fix it. It's like, oh no, this is being purposely maintained because it's valuable. And then I'd also say wider understanding of assassination programs, whether it's JFK, Malcolm X, MLK, Fred Hampton domestically, or the Jakarta program, or all the the Vietnam War and Phoenix program, or all this killing that had to be done to make the world safe for capitalism. Understanding that, I think, definitely radicalized me. And I think in terms of how you don't tune out, it's understanding capitalism as why the Democrats and Republicans suck, basically, right? Like the Republicans, in my shorthand, and obviously this is overly simplistic because a lot of owners love the Democrats too, but I think ownership is typically the id of the Republicans and management is that of Democrats, but both are very capitalist and just trying to make the capitalist system work well enough. So if you understand that, then you're not so, I guess, shocked and put out and surprised when the Democrats act like capitalists and like the managerial sort of layer they are. And I don't know, as far as not getting burned out, I mean, I feel burned out. So no, I'm joking.
Yeah.
I mean, only halfway.
It's Warren, I appreciate the call. We're probably gonna have to hang up in a second just because we have a bunch of IMs and calls to get to, but getting burned out is difficult. We do this for our job, so I think it's probably a little bit of a different dynamic than what other people might experience.
Oh yeah, if I had to work a job and then come home and try to learn all this, I wouldn't do it. I absolutely wouldn't do it.
I would have been.
No, I feel you guys, and just want to, before you hang up, just want to thank you for your time. And I know the burnout is real right now. I used to work before. Right now, I'm a law student, and every time when you just keep up to date with the specific technocratic ways they try to screw people, it's absolutely exhausting. But, you got to keep on fighting. Both of you guys are doing good work. Everyone at the MR crew is doing good work, be it Majority Report, Left Reckoning, and et cetera. So just appreciate you guys, and have a great day. Bye.
You're the man. Thank you. Bye.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, that was a great question. Now I'm actually curious about this. And IMer wrote in and said, Trucker Carlson, he says, Matt, I am interested to hear your theory about the JFK assassination.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, my theory, obviously I was born in 1988, so I wasn't there. And a lot of the evidence, it's hard to determine the provenance and how well it's been maintained. But I would start with Anthony Summers just to demonstrate that the Warren Commission is ridiculous. Any sort of presidential commission is always going to be a cover-up job, but the Warren Commission is a particularly egregious one. My gut is it was an anti-communist hit job. Not that JFK was a communist, but he was going to. There were certain speeches that are famous now that he was going to be softer on that than the alternative. Right? People thought Nixon was going to be president. Nixon was vice president under Eisenhower. Eisenhower had a heart problem. Nixon started taking point on things like the Bay of Pigs. And if Nixon would have won the 1960 election, no doubt in my mind that we would have done an overt invasion of the Bay of Pigs and not just a covert one, because the Kennedys didn't want to allow overt support. And there's like a time zone thing. I can't tell if it was the actual mistake or the Kennedys fucking it. But suffice to say, I think there are a lot of people pissed off about that decision to not, invade Cuba. There was also stuff going on with oil millionaires and the depletion allowance that I've seen. So I think all these people work together, the oil people, the CIA, and the mafia. And they had been working together since the New Deal, right? Like these organizations are. It's sort of how like when the triads come out in is it Japan and people are like surprised that they're like beating up protests. It's like these are reactionary forces as well. So yeah, I think JFK was hit by probably the CIA, or I think the not specifically CIA, but elements of the CIA that were very anti-communist. I mean, LeMay, a general, wanted to just nuke Russia, right? Like, we don't have even now, I think, a great understanding of how out of control the national security state of the immediate post-war years was. So, and I mean, we have some understanding of all the coups and assassinations we've understood. And I would just suggest that to believe that that stopped at our borders and never encroached domestically would be American exceptionalism.
And the U.S., I would say, like, it's so... The CIA outsourced so much of its shady shit to the very affiliates that Matt was mentioning there. So it makes it less traceable, but just based on the pattern of what we saw, I think your theory seems right, Matt.
Also, I might have been wrong about the triads, not in Japan, in China. Sorry about that. Oh, and let me just add another correction. I mistake my Clippers. I said Bob McAdoo. I meant Elgin Baylor. So let's just get all Matt's corrections out of the way. The Yakuza is Japan. I should have known that.
Baylor, RIP, just passed away, too. So
yep, exactly.
Correction there. Foresto writes in, my read on cruelty to the homeless is that the societal implication of the dichotomy between empathy for those in bad situations and American valorization of those who succeed at capitalism creates discomfort. Instead of thinking critically about that discomfort, a lot of people blame the homeless for making them feel that way. That's a very, very smart point in my view. Sean from NorCal writes in, so John Joyce would force a company to publish a book that they have the rights to against their will? That sounds like tyranny, straight up. I agree. California Burning Girl, I already wrote that. Prairie Fire Kowalski writes in, 15-day forecast is looking good in the prairie. Planting season should start here between the 10th and the 15th. Good moisture and fair weather along with daily harvest. Thank you so much, Bob. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I appreciate it, Kowalski. Phil from Boston says, the Dr. Seuss bill is a 2-for-1 bill. They get to virtue signal and push for defunding public education. That's a good point. I didn't realize that was a part of the bill, but that makes sense. Mark Monkey says, Lil Nas X offending conservatives because he gave Satan a lap dance while they simultaneously want racist depictions to remain in Dr. Seuss books they haven't read is a bit telling, if you ask me. Yes, I think they're definitely triggered by Lil Nas X. Coach McGurk says, Emma and Matt, your coverage of this culture war shit is hilarious. Thank you. Will OAN, or the Hunchback of the Gowanus Canal, writes in, will OAN, Fox, Newsmax, and other right-wing outlets save Greenwald from Sam and Emma's far-left cancel culture agenda? I don't know. Barathami2 says, are you guys covering Greenwald today, and any update on Crowder's heart condition? I didn't know Crowder. We're not covering Greenwald because, like, what's the point? I mean,
yeah.
The one thing I'll say about this is, like, I saw Michael Tracy go after Sam and was like, of course, now this, he's calling him all these names. Now they turn on Glenn when it's convenient. It's like, actually, we waited a long time because we respected the work that he'd done in the past and had hoped that this bizarre shift was temporary. In fact, it's not the bug, it's the feature. And Glenn just went off on a string of adjectives about Sam, and I guess myself over the weekend, if someone had told me that would have happened 2 years ago, that would have made me very upset, and now I don't care at all.
Yeah, if it was Scahill, I might have lost sleep over it.
Yeah, I'd be bummed if it was Scahill, right?
And I would have taken the criticism over pettiness more to heart, I think. Somebody like that than somebody with a recent track record of, I would call, pettiness.
Yes. Glenn Greenwald thinks that Sam's posture is hunched over, in case people were unaware. I could work on my posture too, so maybe Glenn has a point there. Let's talk about substance.
Oh, he definitely does. It's just the messenger. He's not the right messenger for it right now.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Tom Hauptmann says, I really love how absolutely tilted Matt gets about people using literature to push such a BS cancel culture narrative. Gotta go, I think. GTG. look at walkers since finding out how young Emma is. Yeah, I feel like I reference that too much, but it's just like relevant, I guess, to my political perspective. So, Comrade Cat says Carl didn't cover socialism correctly. Anarchists are socialists, for example. Also, Carl did paint a picture of socialism as only being when the government does things. I don't know. Majority Report wardrobe coordinator says Trump at the wedding. 2 people coming together and collectively sharing their resources and taking care of each other for life. That sounds like socialism to me. Did crazy Bernie officiate this? Pretty good.
Can I just say, regards to Carl's private versus personal property distinction, I actually found that interesting, the way he said that, because I think the common distinction is private property is under the rule of the state because that's a capitalist asset, and personal property is not. However, I think it's arguable that in a situation, personal property should be subject to the state as well. Let's say your personal property all of a sudden started giving off radiation that was affecting your neighbor. Very clearly that the state have an interest in coming in and regulating your approach to it. So in that sense, like, I don't know, it made me think about that commonly made distinction a little bit differently. But I understand, like, if you're a IWW guy and you're trying to organize people into a union, I would say that's probably not the tack to take.
Let's take one more call and then we are going to get out of here. Sorry, guys. This is the final call of the day. Calling from a 917 number. I believe that's a New Yorker. Who is this? Where are you calling from?
This is Alex from New York.
Alex from New York. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. I got a little matchup for you guys.
I love your matchups, Alex.
Okay. Today, got Rick Wilson and Steve Schmidt and Sarah Sanders and Meghan McCain.
Okay. All right. Let me look up Rick Wilson height. Why would that be?
So can you repeat that one more time for me?
Rick Wilson. Oh, he actually tweeted, "How tall am I?" Oh, he didn't respond. Or a tweet is unavailable. Anyway, Rick Wilson versus Steve Schmidt. I'm going to say Steve Schmidt. I think Steve Schmidt's younger. He seems bigger. And Steve Schmidt, Rick Wilson, when you saw him be humiliated at the Lincoln Project, like by those tuning out the news people, he's had like a silent rage about him. Where we know Steve Schmidt has fought really hard to remain relevant and be on TV. He even had a movie made about him by HBO, played by Woody Harrelson. He's scrappy, so I think I'm going to take.
Yeah. Steve Schmidt looks like he's fighting for his life all the time. Rick Wilson would go down fast, I think.
Yeah, I also think there's an age difference, so I think we're both going to take Steve Schmidt. And then you said Sarah Huckabee Sanders versus
Meghan McCain, the Queen of Arizona.
I gotta take Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I mean, but that's such a good one from so many different levels. Children, daughters of prominent Republican politicians who have public profiles in their own right. I'll say it's similar really stature, but I think Sarah Huckabee Sanders has probably got Meghan McCain.
So it's 5-1 versus 5-4, apparently.
Who's 5-1?
5-1 is Meghan McCain.
That's what I'm saying. That's okay. Well, I thought Sarah Huckabee Sanders might have been taller than that. But Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the amount that she committed to the lying was something to behold. Meghan McCain is such a princess that she'd just roll over. So definitely Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you, guys.
I'll make a case for Meghan McCain, even though I don't know if I believe it, but I feel like she probably spends more time in like whatever sort of weight room that The View gives. So I feel like you might just have a fitness. I don't want to, maybe Sarah Huckabee's getting after too, but I imagine like The View has some kind of nice Equinox package that Meghan McCain will go and do her work just so she can get a nice smoothie afterwards. So I would, that would be my case. If Meghan McCain were to win, that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's too devil's advocate though there, Matt. That's very Lil Nas X advocate, because I just actually think that she would, anytime she works out, she's just going to be doing what girls do, like vanity muscles, where you're not actually strong. You're strong, right? You know, you just want to tone very specific teeny muscles with bands and stuff. Real girls get in the weight room.
Agreed.
Later, Alex.
Take care.
You know, she might be in there with a back.
That was our last call of the day. Go on, Matt.
I was gonna say she might be with, like, one of those, you know, back supports in the overhead.
Yeah.
There's.
Yeah. So, Leckhead Larry, just a few more IMs, and then we're gonna get out of here to say what Sam usually says. Does Matt have any dedicated episodes to intelligence agency history on any of his shows? I love when he talks about this stuff. Agreed.
I do not know. I had back in the Obama era, my podcast was my side project was going to be a JFK assassination podcast, and then Trump won, and then I realized doing that weekly during the Trump administration would have driven me literally insane. So I'm actually a little bit fuzzy on this stuff. It's been a few years since I've dug deep in it. Yeah, I would I recommend. I think Mike Racine had Matt Chrisman on. I think Matt Chrisman's take on the JFK assassination, which is that enough patterns emerge where it's super fishy and actually like interesting and reveals a lot about the national security state to be even worthwhile, even if it's nothing. But you can't really be definite about it. It's hard for me to be super definite about any one thing.
Right. You're cutting out a little bit, Matt. So I think that's where we're going to end off. Thank you guys. For the rest of the week, we're going to have some really interesting guests, and looking forward to having you with us for the rest of the week. Later.
All right, folks. See you.
See ya.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better.